Hello, my name's Arthur Millner, and I'm the specialist consultant in Indian and Islamic art at Olympia Auctions. And I want to talk to you today about Indian ceramics, or rather South Asian ceramics, which is perhaps a little bit less familiar to a lot of you than what we traditionally think of as Indian art, the miniature paintings, the bronzes, the sculpture and the textiles. And of course, ceramics are produced all around the world. You get unglazed pottery in almost every corner of the globe. But glazed ceramics is really what we're focusing on now. And this is a tradition which came from overseas. It came from mostly thought to have come from Persia and the Middle East. Now, this happened during the Islamic period, although there is some evidence that glazed ceramics were used in India in very early times, in the Buddhist period. There are some traces of glazed pottery. So there was a knowledge of glazed ceramics before Islam, but it was really the advent of the new religion and the tradition of using glazed ceramics as tiles to decorate buildings which spurred the use of glazing on in a very dramatic way. And this really began around the 13th century in northern India. Now, we're not going to cover the whole period of producing tiles in India, and in fact I'm working on a book on this at the moment, and it's a rather large, complex subject, and we certainly don't have time now. But I just wanted to show you one or two interesting examples of glazed ceramics from the end of the 19th century. That's during the time of the British Raj, when some rather interesting things happened. Now, this was a short-lived phenomenon of ceramics being produced instead of for architecture, ceramics being produced to sell both to the local British expatriate community and also to export around the world. This was during the time of the Great Exhibitions. The Great Exhibition was in 1851 in London, and there was a very major display of Indian arts and crafts there. And amongst all these crafts were ceramics produced by potters from the region who had begun to turn away from architectural work because there just simply weren't enough commissions happening. There was a little bit of restoration of buildings that was ongoing all the time. And then one or two tombs being built, which would be clad in tiles, but it was very much on a lower scale than earlier times. So the potters felt the need to redirect their efforts towards producing ceramics which were ornamental, small objects, decorative objects for people to buy as mementos and souvenirs. And this was something that really picked up speed in the second half of the 19th century. Now, the Indian and, it's now what would be what's now Pakistan. In these regions, there were potters working away, and they'd already begun to start producing objects, a little bit like this one, for example. This is actually a modern piece, but it's very much in the traditional style. It's the sort of pottery, very similar, was being produced in Sindh, in the south of Pakistan in the second half of the 19th century. This is slip-painted pottery. It's red earthenware. You can see the price there. In fact, we were charged £500, 500 rupees, not 360 as it says here. But this slipware pottery grew out of a local tradition of pottery, but then it began to be used in tiles as well in architecture. But in the 19th century, the move went back towards producing objects. But also, as well as the potters themselves thinking of doing this, there was a government-sponsored initiative to set up art schools, and this was really an offshoot of the European arts and crafts movement. And the most notable place in this context was the Bombay School of Art. which was set up soon after the Great Exhibition. And I'm going to show you now a typical example of the output. Now, this is quite interesting because it's very much in the same technique as the pot we were just looking at. And in fact, they did get potters in from Sind to instruct the students and show them the technical side. But as far as the designs are concerned, these are very different. They're Hindu subject matter. We've got Shiva here with 2 attendants, and then you can see Nandi, the bull vehicle, behind, and then lots of other deities dotted around the sides. And this was a real attempt, rather top down from the British officials, to encourage the crafts to involve themselves with earlier traditions of Indian art and find new meaning and new subject matter. And one of the great inspirations was the newly discovered caves at Ajanta, not far from Bombay, just a bit further to the north, to the northeast. And this one's interesting. This is another large dish, which in fact is remarkably similar to the cave paintings at Ajanta. When you go in some of the caves, they've got painted roundels on the ceilings, and they're rows of ducks, or geese rather, just like this. So it's quite interesting. They were very, very closely inspired by these early Buddhist paintings. And as well as these, there were some other things being produced which were much closer to the traditions of the Islamic traditions of Multan and Sind. Now, this is a blue and white painted. It's the same sort of red earthenware here, and this was also produced at the Bombay School of Art, but it's very much closer to the Islamic monuments of the Indus region. And this blue and white, it's 2 types of blue, a dark cobalt blue, and then there's a lighter copper-based blue here. And the designs are obviously not depicting figures, they're just floral designs. And this is very much the sort of decoration that you'll see on the tombs and mosques of Multan and Sind. And by the way, I just want to say I was recently in Pakistan, and that's where I bought the slipware pot, which I showed you before. I do recommend it as a country to visit once we get out of this lockdown, because it's the most fascinating place, and it very much needs to re-energise its tourism sector, because it's obviously been very difficult over the last decade or two there as far as tourism's concerned, and it was just beginning to come back before this COVID-19 problem. So let's hope that in the months and years to come it can pick up again, because it's the most fascinating country with lots of interesting things to see. Anyway, thank you very much.